Ma'am, you don't belong in first class. The words landed with the sharp certainty of someone who believed appearance was evidence, and for a brief second, even the chatter inside Gate B18 seemed to disappear. Travelers froze with coffee cups in hand. A little boy looked up from his tablet. A businessman slowly lowered his newspaper. Every pair of eyes drifted toward the woman standing quietly at the entrance to the jet bridge. Naomi Brooks didn't react. She wore dark jeans, clean white sneakers, and a simple black crewneck shirt beneath a light gray jacket. No luxury handbag, no designer logo, no jewelry that begged for attention. Just a black leather travel folder resting beneath one arm, and the calm expression of someone who had already lived through this moment more times than anyone should. Nicole Harper, the senior flight attendant assigned to Flight 271 from Chicago to San Francisco, folded her arms across her Navy uniform and stared at Naomi as if she had wandered into the wrong building. "Economy boarding is behind the blue sign," she said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. Naomi glanced at her boarding pass before raising her eyes again. "My seat is 2A." Nicole barely looked at the ticket before shaking her head. "That can't be right." The words came quickly, rehearsed almost by instinct. She reached for the boarding pass without asking permission, studying it for barely a second before exhaling through her nose. There must be some mistake. Naomi's expression never changed. "Would you like to scan it again?" Nicole ignored the question. Instead, she looked Naomi up and down one more time, lingering on the sneakers, the plain jacket, the absence of anything that matched her idea of wealth. "First class is reserved for premium passengers." Several people exchanged uneasy glances. A young woman standing nearby frowned but stayed silent. An older man adjusted his glasses, sensing something wasn't right. Naomi spoke with the same even tone. "I purchased a first-class ticket." Nicole smiled politely, but there was nothing warm about it. "Ma'am, people make mistakes all the time." She lifted the boarding pass slightly. This one included. The atmosphere shifted almost imperceptibly. The gate area still looked polished and orderly, but something heavier settled into the air. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was judgment. Naomi had seen that look before. She remembered being 21 years old, wearing her only blazer to an internship interview, only to be asked if she was delivering lunch instead of applying for an executive program. Years later, billions of dollars in acquisitions, thousands of employees, and countless board meetings had changed her title, but they hadn't erased that familiar expression on someone's face. She had learned long ago that prejudice rarely announced itself with shouting. Sometimes it arrived wearing a pleasant smile and a company name tag. Nicole turned toward another employee behind the podium. "Don't process any more passengers until we verify this." Her voice carried just enough authority to stop the line. Murmurs spread through the waiting area. Someone whispered that maybe the ticket was counterfeit. Someone else quietly wondered why no one had scanned it first. Naomi stood perfectly still, as though rooted to the polished airport floor itself. Her breathing remained slow. Her shoulders never tensed. If anything, she seemed to be watching everyone else more carefully than they were watching her. From inside her jacket pocket, her phone vibrated once. She didn't answer it. Not yet. Somewhere far beyond Gate B18, events were already beginning to move, though nobody standing there had the slightest idea. Nicole handed the boarding pass to another gate agent and spoke just loudly enough for the nearest passengers to hear. "Until we know who she really is, she's not stepping into that cabin." Naomi finally lifted her eyes and met Nicole's gaze. There was no anger in them, only quiet certainty. And somehow, that calm unsettled the room far more than any argument ever could. Naomi Brooks did not reach for the boarding pass. She simply let the gate agent continue holding it, as though the small piece of paper no longer mattered. Around her, the boarding line had stopped moving completely. A digital display continued counting down toward departure while the passengers waited. Without understanding why a routine boarding process had suddenly become a public examination of one traveler, Nicole Harper seemed almost energized by the attention. She stepped closer to the boarding podium and lowered her voice just enough to sound professional while making certain everyone nearby could still hear. "Until we verify everything, you will need to wait off to the side." Naomi nodded once without protest and stepped exactly 2 feet away from the entrance. She neither argued nor demanded a supervisor. That quiet decision puzzled several passengers more than any confrontation would have. Most people expected anger after humiliation. Instead, they saw patience. A young gate agent named Ethan glanced nervously at the computer monitor. He quietly whispered, "The barcode scanned successfully the first time." Nicole shot him a sharp look. "Run it again." Ethan obeyed. The scanner produced the same confirmation tone. "Valid boarding pass. Seat 2A." Nicole frowned. "The system is probably delayed." Ethan looked uncertain, but said nothing more. Naomi watched the exchange without interruption. She had walked into airports like this for more than 20 years. She knew that people often mistook calm for weakness. In reality, calm allowed her to observe everything others overlooked. Every expression, every whispered comment, every decision made under pressure. Her phone vibrated again. This time she slipped it from her jacket pocket and glanced at the screen for only a moment before replying with a single sentence. "It is happening." Hundreds of miles away, Rachel Evans looked at the message and immediately closed the financial report she had been reviewing. She did not ask questions because none were necessary. She opened a secure communication channel reserved for executive emergencies and quietly notified 3 members of Naomi's executive office. The subject line contained only 2 words: live audit. Within seconds, calendars were cleared, conference lines were reserved, and internal compliance officers received automated alerts. Back at the gate, none of it was visible. Nicole still believed she controlled the situation. She motioned toward another passenger. Waiting nearby, a middle-aged businessman wearing an expensive tailored suit. "Sir, we apologize for the delay." Her smile returned instantly. "We will have you seated shortly." The contrast did not escape the growing audience. A woman holding a rolling suitcase leaned toward her husband and whispered. She never even checked that man's identification. He quietly nodded without taking his eyes off Naomi. Nearby, a college student lowered his headphones and began watching the entire exchange with growing curiosity. The atmosphere no longer felt like ordinary airport inconvenience. It felt like everyone had become unwilling participants in a test they had never agreed to take. Nicole finally turned back toward Naomi. "Do you have another form of identification?" Naomi calmly handed over her driver's license. Nicole barely glanced at it before setting it on the counter beside the boarding pass. "Please continue waiting." Naomi folded her hands loosely in front of her and looked through the large terminal windows toward the aircraft resting at the gate. The afternoon sunlight reflected across its polished fuselage, making everything appear peaceful from the outside. Only those standing nearby knew that something much larger than a boarding delay had already begun. Naomi had boarded hundreds of airplanes over the years, but today she had not come simply to reach another meeting. She had come to measure something that could never appear on a quarterly report or a balance sheet: character. And without realizing it, everyone around her had already begun revealing exactly who they were. Nicole Harper looked at the departure clock and made a decision that would change far more than a boarding sequence. She reached across the counter, tapped several commands into the terminal, and frowned as though the computer itself had become unreliable. "That is strange," she said, letting the words drift toward the waiting passengers. "I do not see an active first-class assignment under your reservation anymore." Ethan glanced at the monitor beside her. Only moments earlier he had watched the confirmation appear twice. Now the seat map displayed 2A as available. His eyebrows tightened, but before he could speak, Nicole quietly moved the keyboard away from him. "I will handle this," she said. Naomi Brooks remained exactly where she was. She did not lean forward. She did not question the screen. She simply watched the people instead of the technology. Experience had taught her that systems rarely failed on their own. People did. A few feet away, the businessman who had been waiting near the priority lane stepped closer. Nicole greeted him with the same welcoming smile she had never offered Naomi. "Sir, we have resolved a seating adjustment. We can accommodate you in first class today if that works for you." The man looked pleasantly surprised. "That would be wonderful." Naomi heard every word without changing her expression. Another passenger whispered, "I thought someone already had that seat." His wife answered quietly, "So did I." The line became restless. Boarding had completely stopped, and questions spread faster than answers. A woman traveling with her teenage daughter frowned as she watched Nicole attach a fresh seat document to the businessman's itinerary. Across the waiting area, A young travel blogger named Sophia Mitchell slowly raised her phone. She was not recording yet. Something simply felt wrong enough to remember. Near the aircraft door, a junior flight attendant named Emma Collins had been assisting passengers inside the cabin. When boarding unexpectedly stopped, she walked back toward the gate podium. "Nicole," she asked softly, "is everything all right?" Nicole barely looked at her. "Minor reservation issue." Emma glanced toward Naomi, then toward the monitor Ethan had just stepped away from. "I thought seat 2A had already been assigned." Nicole answered before Ethan could. "Not anymore." Ethan lowered his eyes. He knew exactly what he had seen only minutes earlier, but uncertainty kept him silent. Naomi noticed his hesitation immediately. She also noticed Emma's confusion. Neither had spoken against the decision, but both were beginning to question it. Sometimes that was how truth entered a room. Not through dramatic speeches, but through quiet doubt. Nicole turned back toward Naomi. "Since there is no valid first-class assignment attached to your reservation, you may either accept a seat in economy or speak with customer service after the flight." Her tone remained controlled, almost courteous, yet every sentence carried the same assumption that had started this encounter. Naomi answered with identical calm. "I will remain here." Nicole sighed dramatically, making certain nearby travelers could hear her frustration. "You are delaying everyone else." A few passengers shifted uncomfortably, but no one blamed Naomi. They had watched every minute unfold. They knew who had stopped the line. Sophia finally touched the record button on her phone. She did not speak. She simply aimed the camera toward the podium. Emma quietly stepped beside Ethan and whispered, "Did the system actually remove her seat?" Ethan hesitated before answering under his breath, "I do not think the system did." Those 8 words never reached Nicole's ears, but they marked the first crack in the story she was trying to build. Naomi looked through the terminal windows once more, where the aircraft waited beneath the afternoon sky, as motionless as a photograph. Inside the airport, the delay appeared to be about 1 passenger. Beyond the terminal walls, invisible notifications were already moving through executive offices, compliance servers, and secure communication channels. The people gathered at Gate B18 believed they were witnessing a disagreement over a boarding pass. They had no idea they were standing at the beginning of an investigation that had already started without a single announcement. Emma Collins could not shake the feeling that something important had just gone terribly wrong. She quietly excused herself from the aircraft door and walked back toward the boarding podium, her eyes fixed on the reservation screen that Nicole had already turned away from everyone else. "Nicole," she asked carefully, "would you like me to verify the passenger list before we continue boarding?" Nicole answered without looking up. "There is nothing left to verify." Her voice carried the confidence of someone determined to end the conversation instead of the problem. Emma hesitated. During training, she had been taught that every discrepancy deserved a second review, especially when a confirmed passenger questioned a seating assignment. Yet everything happening at Gate B18 seemed to be moving in the opposite direction. Nearby, Sophia Mitchell continued recording with her phone, no longer pretending she was simply checking messages. She slowly moved closer until both Naomi Brooks and the boarding podium fit inside the frame. Standing beside her, another traveler named Michael Turner folded his arms as he watched the exchange unfold. He had flown hundreds of times for business and recognized the difference between a security concern and a customer service decision. This was neither. "Excuse me," Michael finally said, addressing Nicole in a calm voice. "Did her boarding pass not scan?" Nicole answered immediately. "That information is confidential." Michael nodded once. "Then I will ask a different question. Has she raised her voice?" Nicole remained silent. "Has she threatened anyone?" Still no answer. "Then why has boarding stopped for everyone?" Several passengers quietly murmured in agreement. A woman near the priority lane looked toward Naomi and said softly, "She has been standing here the entire time without causing any trouble." Another traveler added, "I watched her hand over a valid boarding pass." The atmosphere shifted again. Only minutes earlier, people had assumed there must be information they could not see. Now they had begun trusting what they had witnessed with their own eyes. Nicole sensed the change immediately. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "we appreciate your patience while we resolve an internal reservation issue." Michael answered before anyone else could. Respectfully, it stopped looking like a reservation issue a long time ago. His words settled over the waiting area like a quiet challenge. Ethan lowered his eyes again, but Emma no longer could. She stepped closer to the podium and gently rotated the secondary monitor just enough to glimpse the flight history. A small notification remained visible in the corner of the screen. Seat 2A had been confirmed earlier that afternoon. Emma looked back at Naomi, then at Nicole. "Nicole," she said carefully, "the confirmation record is still in the activity log." Nicole's expression hardened. "Emma, return to the aircraft." Emma did not move. "The record shows the seat existed." Ethan finally found the courage to speak. "I saw it too." Silence spread across the gate. Even the boarding scanner seemed louder than before as it sat unused on the counter. Sophia lowered her phone for only a second before raising it again. "People should see this," she whispered. Naomi remained completely still. She had not interrupted anyone. She had not asked anyone to defend her. Yet one voice had become two, and two had become several. Truth often traveled that way, quietly gathering strength until it no longer needed an introduction. Nicole folded her arms again, trying to reclaim authority. "Everyone needs to stop interfering with airline procedures." Michael looked directly at her. "Procedures are supposed to protect people, not explain them away." No one answered him because no one needed to. The expressions across the waiting area said enough. Strangers who had arrived thinking only about reaching San Francisco had begun sharing something far more important than an itinerary. They were sharing the uncomfortable realization that they had watched assumptions replace facts in real time. Naomi slowly looked around the gate, meeting the eyes of Emma, Ethan, Michael, and Sophia one by one. She offered nothing more than a quiet nod of appreciation. She still had not revealed who she was, and she had no intention of doing so yet. The test was still unfolding, and with every passing minute, more people were revealing their character than they ever realized. The conversation at Gate B18 had stopped sounding like an ordinary boarding delay and begun resembling a quiet courtroom where every word carried unexpected weight. Nicole Harper looked from Emma Collins to Ethan and then toward the growing circle of passengers who had abandoned their own conversations to watch what happened next. The confidence she had displayed only minutes earlier was beginning to harden into impatience. "This discussion is over," she declared. "Either accept an available economy seat or step away from the boarding area so we can continue boarding the remaining passengers." Naomi Brooks met her eyes with the same calm expression she had worn from the beginning. "I will remain with the ticket I purchased." Nicole took one deliberate step forward and lightly placed a hand against Naomi's forearm, attempting to guide her away from the entrance. The contact lasted only a brief moment before Naomi gently stepped back and looked directly at her. "Please do not touch me again." Her voice never rose above a normal conversation, yet every nearby passenger heard it clearly. The words carried no anger, only quiet certainty. Time seemed to slow for Naomi as an old memory surfaced without warning. She was 19 years old again, standing inside a regional airport wearing the only blazer she owned after earning a scholarship to attend a national leadership conference. A gate employee had looked at her ticket, looked at her face, and smiled politely before saying, "There must be some mistake." She remembered watching other passengers walk past without a single question while she waited nearly 2 hours to prove she belonged on the same airplane. She remembered calling her mother from a pay phone, trying not to let disappointment sound like defeat. Her mother had answered with words Naomi never forgot. "Never let someone else's assumptions become your identity." That sentence had followed her into every classroom, every board meeting, every negotiation, and every success that came afterward. The memory faded as quickly as it arrived, replaced by the bright lights of Gate B18 and the dozens of faces now watching in complete silence. Nicole folded her hands together as though nothing unusual had happened. "You are making this much more difficult than it needs to be." Naomi answered quietly, "No, I am allowing it to become exactly what it already is." Michael Turner slowly shook his head. "She asked you not to touch her. That should have been enough." Sophia Mitchell continued recording, capturing every expression rather than searching for dramatic moments. Emma Collins stood frozen beside the podium, her training telling her one thing, while the unfolding reality taught another. Ethan looked toward the departure clock. Nearly 15 minutes had passed since boarding first stopped. Inside a downtown office several miles from the airport, Rachel Evans watched secure notifications continue appearing across her screen. Compliance officers had acknowledged receipt. Executive legal counsel had joined the encrypted conference line. Operational leadership had begun requesting live reports from airport management without revealing the reason. Rachel looked at the clock and quietly documented another entry. Minute 15. Meanwhile, Gate B18 remained completely unaware that its routine afternoon departure had already become the subject of executive attention. Naomi reached into her jacket pocket and unlocked her phone once more. She typed only 4 words before pressing send. Proceed to the next phase. She slipped the phone away without checking for a reply because she already knew one would come. Nicole noticed the movement and smiled with quiet disbelief. Calling someone is not going to change airline policy. Naomi looked toward the aircraft waiting outside the terminal windows before returning her gaze to Nicole. No, she replied softly. But the truth has a way of arriving on schedule. Around them, no one returned to the boarding line. No one complained about the delay anymore. The passengers had stopped worrying about departure times because they had begun witnessing something far more revealing than a delayed flight. They were watching the difference between authority exercised with confidence and authority exercised without fairness. And with every passing minute, that difference became impossible to ignore. Naomi Brooks slipped her phone back into her jacket as though she had merely answered an ordinary message, but somewhere beyond the walls of the airport, ordinary had already disappeared. Rachel Evans read the forward instruction and immediately authenticated Protocol 7, using a secure executive authorization reserved for only the highest level of operational oversight. Within seconds, encrypted notifications reached the Chief Compliance Officer, the General Counsel, the Vice President of Flight Operations, and the Chairman of the Board. No public announcement was made. No alarm sounded. The process moved with quiet precision, invisible to everyone standing at Gate B18. Rachel joined the secure conference line and spoke calmly. The live service audit has entered escalation. All communications from Gate B18 are being preserved. Reservation history, employee actions, system activity, and operational logs are now locked for review. One by one, acknowledgments appeared across her screen. Back at the airport, Nicole Harper still believed the situation remained entirely under her control. She folded the boarding documents and looked toward the aircraft door. Captain Daniel Ross needs to know we are experiencing a difficult passenger, she said before reaching for the gate telephone. Ethan glanced toward Emma Collins, both of them visibly uncomfortable. Emma finally spoke again. Nicole, perhaps we should allow airport customer service to review the reservation before making another decision. Nicole answered without hesitation. There is nothing left to review. Naomi listened without interruption. She had spent years sitting across negotiating tables where the loudest voice was rarely the strongest one. She understood that people revealed their character most clearly when they believed nobody with authority was watching. That was precisely why she had boarded this trip alone, dressed simply, without an assistant, without security, and without any symbol of executive status. Financial reports could measure revenue. Surveys could measure satisfaction. Neither could measure integrity during an unexpected moment. Michael Turner quietly addressed the passengers standing nearby. Has anyone here actually seen her behave disrespectfully? Several heads shook at once. A mother traveling with 2 children answered first. She has been more patient than anyone else would have been. An older veteran standing near the boarding lane nodded. All I have seen is someone repeatedly asked to prove she belongs after presenting a valid ticket. Sophia Mitchell continued recording, but now her attention had shifted beyond Naomi. She focused on the reactions of everyone else. Faces that had begun with curiosity were now marked by concern. Emma looked once more at the inactive boarding scanner and then toward Ethan. The system confirmed her seat twice, she whispered. Ethan answered quietly. I know. The silence between those 2 words carried more weight than another argument ever could. Naomi's phone vibrated softly. She glanced at the screen for only a moment before locking it again. Rachel's reply contained just one sentence. Executive review is active. Naomi allowed herself the smallest, almost invisible nod. 20 minutes had passed since the first accusation. Outside the terminal windows, ground crews continued preparing the aircraft, unaware that executive leadership was now monitoring events connected to their departure. Inside corporate headquarters, a large digital operations board displayed Flight 271 with a discrete compliance marker visible only to authorized personnel. Senior executives watched incoming reports without yet intervening. They wanted to understand not only what had happened, but how employees behaved before they realized anyone important might be listening. At Gate B18, Nicole straightened her uniform and addressed Naomi one final time. "This is your last opportunity to accept economy seating before we complete boarding." Naomi looked at her with the same composed expression she had worn from the beginning. "I appreciate the offer," she said evenly, "but I did not come here to test the seating chart." Nicole frowned, clearly confused by the answer. Naomi offered nothing further. Around them, the waiting passengers sensed that something larger than a disagreement over a seat was unfolding. They could not yet see the full picture, but they could feel the balance beginning to shift, as though an unseen door had quietly opened somewhere far beyond the gate, and the consequences were already on their way. The departure clock quietly changed again. 28 minutes had passed since Naomi Brooks first presented her boarding pass, and the gate that should have been empty by now remained filled with waiting passengers, silent employees, and unanswered questions. Nicole Harper reached once more for the gate telephone, determined to finish what she had started. Before she could dial another number, every computer monitor at the boarding podium flashed at the same time. Ethan instinctively stepped back. Emma stared at the screen without speaking. A bold notification appeared across the reservation system. "Executive operations hold. Do not continue boarding. Await corporate authorization." Nicole frowned and pressed a few keys, believing the system had frozen. Nothing changed. A second notification replaced the first. "Chairman and Executive Compliance Conference active. Flight operations locked." Even the boarding scanner emitted a short alert tone before displaying the same message. Around the gate, passengers exchanged confused glances. Michael Turner quietly read the words over Ethan's shoulder. "Corporate just stopped the boarding process," he said. Sophia Mitchell lowered her phone only long enough to make certain she had read the message correctly before continuing to record. Nicole forced a smile that no longer reached her eyes. "This is simply a temporary technical issue." Ethan swallowed nervously. "I have never seen this protocol before." Emma looked toward Naomi, whose expression remained completely unchanged. It was as though she had been expecting this exact moment from the beginning. Naomi's phone vibrated once. She answered the call without moving away from the podium. "Good afternoon, Rachel." Her voice was calm enough that only the nearest passengers could hear. Rachel Evans spoke clearly from the other end. "The board is assembled. The chairman is present. Compliance has completed the preliminary review. They are waiting for your authorization." Naomi replied with quiet certainty. "Thank you. Put the chairman on speaker." Rachel answered immediately. "Connecting now." A new voice filled the phone, steady and unmistakably authoritative. "Good afternoon, Ms. Brooks. The executive board is standing by." Every conversation at Gate B18 stopped. Nicole slowly lowered her hand from the keyboard. Emma looked from the phone to Naomi as realization began forming across her face. Naomi spoke with the same measured composure she had maintained for nearly half an hour. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. Before we proceed, I would like everyone at Gate B18 to hear one statement." The chairman answered without hesitation. "Whenever you are ready." Naomi lifted her eyes toward Nicole. There was no satisfaction in her expression. No anger, only quiet disappointment. 28 minutes ago," she said, "I presented a valid first-class boarding pass for Seat 2 Alpha. During those 28 minutes I was told I did not belong. My confirmed reservation disappeared. Another passenger was offered my seat, and every assumption made about me was based on appearance instead of fact." The gate had become so quiet that even the distant sound of rolling luggage seemed to disappear. Naomi continued. "My name is Naomi Brooks." She paused only long enough for every face to turn toward her. "I am the Chief Executive Officer of Altitude Airways." No one moved. Nicole's confident posture dissolved into complete disbelief. Ethan's mouth fell open. Emma covered her lips with one trembling hand as every unanswered question suddenly found its answer. Michael slowly exhaled while Sophia's camera remained perfectly steady. Naomi looked directly at Nicole one final time. "You did not deny a passenger access to first class today," she said. "You denied the chief executive officer of this airline access to her own cabin. But that is not the greatest failure. The greatest failure is that you believed someone who looked like me could not possibly belong there. The silence that followed was unlike anything the gate had experienced all afternoon. It was not the silence of confusion. It was the silence that arrives when the truth enters a room and leaves every excuse standing alone. No one at Gate B18 spoke for several long seconds. The silence felt heavier than the rolling engines outside the terminal windows. Nicole Harper stared at Naomi Brooks as though the words she had just heard refused to fit inside the reality she believed only moments earlier. Her shoulders slowly lowered, and the confidence that had guided every decision since boarding began disappeared without a single argument. The chairman's voice remained steady through Naomi's phone. Ms. Brooks, Executive Compliance has completed its preliminary findings. Reservation records confirm that your first-class assignment was valid from the moment you checked in. The activity log also confirms that changes were made to your reservation after your arrival at the gate. All digital records have been preserved. Naomi answered quietly. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. Please proceed. Effective immediately, the chairman continued. Flight 271 is placed under executive operational review. Boarding is suspended until further notice. The assigned crew, gate operations, and related service decisions will be reviewed under company policy. A replacement crew will be assigned after the investigation is complete. The announcement settled over the gate like a wave that left nothing untouched. Ethan looked at the frozen boarding scanner, which now displayed operational hold authorized. Emma's employee badge vibrated with an internal notification confirming the same message. Throughout the terminal, airport operations staff began receiving updated instructions while the aircraft remained parked exactly where it was. Outside the windows, the jet bridge stayed connected. Ground vehicles paused. The aircraft that had been ready for departure only minutes earlier would not leave the gate that afternoon. Michael Turner slowly shook his head. They stopped the entire operation. Sophia Mitchell lowered her phone just enough to whisper, not because of a delayed passenger, because of how she was treated. Around them, travelers who had watched the encounter from the beginning exchanged quiet looks of disbelief. Nobody applauded. Nobody celebrated. The moment demanded reflection instead of excitement. Nicole finally found her voice. Ms. Brooks. The words refused to continue. Naomi looked at her with the same calm expression she had maintained from the beginning. This was never about one seat, she said. If I had accepted being moved simply because someone assumed I did not belong, then the next traveler would face the same judgment tomorrow. Emma stepped forward, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. I should have spoken sooner. Naomi offered her a small nod. You did speak, and when you did, you chose facts over comfort. That choice matters. Ethan lowered his head. I knew the seat had been confirmed. Now you know the importance of saying so, Naomi replied gently. On the conference line, the chairman continued. Employee access connected to this incident is being temporarily restricted pending review. Airport leadership has been instructed to cooperate fully with compliance. Additional guidance will follow after interviews are completed. Nicole looked toward the inactive gate computer as her login session automatically closed. The screen displayed access suspended pending review. She did not protest. She simply stared at the message, realizing that authority built on assumptions could disappear as quickly as it had been exercised. Beyond the terminal glass, the aircraft remained motionless beneath the afternoon sun, surrounded by ground crews waiting for instructions that had not existed half an hour earlier. Inside the terminal, the stillness spread from the boarding podium to every passenger who had witnessed the entire encounter. It was not merely one flight that had stopped. An entire operation had paused to confront a single question that no policy manual could ignore. What happens when people decide who belongs before they decide to learn the truth? In that moment, the airline stood perfectly still, not because of weather, mechanical problems, or air traffic, but because character had become the most important destination of the day. The atmosphere at Gate B18 remained unchanged even after the conference call ended. No one hurried toward the aircraft. No one complained about the delay anymore. The departure board still displayed the flight number, but every person standing there understood that the real journey had never been about traveling from Chicago to San Francisco. It had been about discovering the difference between assumption and truth. Naomi Brooks slowly placed her phone back into her jacket and looked around the terminal one last time. Her eyes settled first on Emma Collins. Keep asking questions when something does not feel right, she said gently. Companies improve because people have the courage to speak before problems become traditions. Emma nodded with quiet determination. I will remember that. Naomi turned toward Ethan. Facts only matter if someone is willing to stand behind them. Ethan met her eyes and answered honestly. I should have trusted what I saw instead of waiting for someone else to speak first. Naomi offered a small smile. Then today was not wasted. Michael Turner adjusted the strap on his briefcase before extending his hand. Thank you for standing your ground. Naomi accepted the handshake. Thank you for standing beside someone you did not know. That is how communities become stronger. Sophia Mitchell lowered her phone for the first time since recording had begun. Millions of people may eventually watch this, she said quietly. Naomi shook her head. If they do, I hope they remember more than my title. I hope they remember that every stranger deserves dignity before credentials. Nearby, Nicole Harper remained silent, looking at the inactive boarding podium where her authority had disappeared with a single system notification. Naomi walked toward her without anger or satisfaction. I do not hate you, she said calmly, but I hope you never again decide someone's worth before learning their name. Nicole slowly nodded, unable to offer anything except a quiet apology. Naomi accepted it with grace, not because the moment erased what had happened, but because accountability begins only after truth is acknowledged. Outside the terminal windows, a replacement flight crew gradually approached the aircraft while airport operations prepared for a fresh departure under new supervision. Passengers were informed that the flight would continue after the review was complete. There were no cheers as boarding preparations quietly resumed. Instead, there was reflection. People returned to their seats carrying something heavier than luggage and far more valuable than an upgraded ticket. They carried a lesson they had witnessed with their own eyes. Later that evening, the executive board released a company-wide message reaffirming that every employee would receive additional training focused on fairness, professionalism, and respect. Internal procedures would be strengthened. Reservation logs would become more transparent. Concerns raised by employees would receive greater protection. None of those changes could erase the previous 28 minutes, but they could help ensure that another traveler would never experience them again. As Naomi finally walked across the jet bridge toward the aircraft, she did so without ceremony, without cameras following her, and without asking anyone to recognize who she was. The cabin door opened quietly, and she took her seat exactly where she had belonged from the very beginning. Before fastening her seat belt, she looked once through the cabin, not with pride, but with hope. Hope that leadership would be measured not by the office someone holds, but by the standards they choose to protect. As the aircraft slowly prepared for departure, one truth remained long after the engines came alive. Naomi had never raised her voice. She had raised the standard. And in doing so, she reminded everyone who witnessed that afternoon that dignity does not come with a boarding pass, a business suit, or a job title. Dignity belongs to every person long before anyone decides where they think that person belongs.